A savvy and cunning killer reaches across the Atlantic Ocean to deal his particular type of death. In addition to committing wholesale murder for the sake of accomplishment, this killer was also fingered as the most mysterious serial killer in the history of mankind. Was Dr. Thomas Neill Cream capable of murdering with poison and yet tearing apart the lives of 5 women in London's Whitechapel district in the autumn of 1888? A dubious man stood on the gallows of Newgate Prison on November 15, 1892, prepared to meet the Almighty. Just as last wishes had been granted and the last meal ingested, the condemned stood on the trap doors waiting for the final drop. Just before he made his exit from the world, he stated rather emphatically, "I am Jack Thee." This one statement opened speculation for the next 130 years as to whether the executed man could have been the most researched and sought-after serial killer in human history. But after further investigation into the life of the condemned man, one Thomas Neill Cream, it revealed a psychotic personality who could have easily worked for good, but instead chose a criminal life that eventually resulted in his execution for murder. Thomas Neill Cream was born in Glasgow, Scotland on May 27, 1850. When Cream turned 4 years old, the family moved to Quebec City in Canada. Cream's childhood demonstrated no particular excitement. He did exhibit extraordinary intelligence and proved to be an excellent student. In his mid-20s, Cream attended McGill University in Montreal, where authorities suspected that he may have been responsible for a fire where he received $350 in insurance money. In 1876, Cream graduated with a medical degree from that college and desired to cross the Atlantic to study medicine in England. Moreover, Cream sought to escape a rather scandalous situation. It seems he impregnated a young woman, and the father of that woman held a wedding ceremony at gunpoint. After the honeymoon, Cream left in the middle of the night and made his way to England, leaving a note for his wife. Cream returned briefly to Canada for a short visit with his wife. Suddenly, she died of a mysterious illness. Feigning grief, Cream left Canada once again to return to Edinburgh, Scotland, where he began practicing medicine. In August of 1879, a woman that Cream had a previous liaison with was found by the police in an alleyway, dead, pregnant, and poisoned. Cream fled Scotland in a hurry and then fled to the United States. When Cream returned to the United States, he set up a medical practice in Chicago, Illinois. Always skating on the dark side of society, although Cream practiced medicine legitimately, he also performed abortions for prostitutes in the area. One woman he serviced died rather unexpectedly, and though Cream fell under suspicion, authorities failed to prosecute him for lack of evidence. On July 14, 1881, a Mr. Stott suddenly died from an overdose of strychnine. Authorities arrested Cream when it was discovered that Mrs. Julia Stott had purchased the poison from Dr. Cream. Mrs. Stott went to Cream's office for Mr. Stott's medicines as usual, and Dr. Cream insisted that Mrs. Stott go to another chemist across town and then return to his office where he would enhance the prescriptions. A few days later, Mr. Stott took the prescriptions, and within a half hour, he was dead. A few days after Stott's burial, the local medical examiner received a telegram requesting that an autopsy be performed on the deceased man. A few days later, another medical examiner received another telegram requesting the same procedure. A third telegram arrived at the medical examiner's office again. When the office contacted the writer, it was none other than Dr. Cream. Cream sent some of the leftover medicine to the medical examiner, who then tested it on a dog. The dog died, and the medical examiner exhumed Stott's corpse. The deceased man's corpse contained enough strychnine to kill 6 men. Cream tried to explain that the pharmacy was responsible for Stott's death, but soon the authorities arrested the doctor, charging him with the murder in complicity with Mrs. Stott. Mrs. Stott turned state's evidence against Cream, and now the suspected poisoner faced a murder charge. The jury found Cream guilty, and the court sentenced him to life imprisonment. It was not the end of the story, though. After serving 10 years at Joliet, Cream's brother pleaded leniency to the court, in addition to bribing some officials, and Cream walked out of the prison. After his release from prison, Cream set sail for Great Britain with a small inheritance that he gained from the death of his father. The wayward convicted murderer, now 41 years old, arrived in Liverpool on October 1, 1891. He went to London and settled down near Lambeth. While the rest of the country experienced wealth as the empire's colonies proved very profitable, the Lambeth area was very poor and poverty-stricken and seethed with petty crime and prostitution. Cream found that the opportunities for female companionship were plentiful, although by this time he was balding and now wore thick spectacles to correct his poor vision and crossed eyes. On October 13, 1891, Ellen Nellie Donworth, the daughter of a laborer and 19 years old, was unsatisfied with the labor she had been doing as a capper in Vauxhall Bottle Factory. She considered the work drudgery and turned instead to prostitution. She shared her room with Ernest Linnell, who did not seem to mind her chosen vocation. At about 6 o'clock on that evening, Donworth left her residence and informed her charwoman, Annie Clements, that she was off to have drinks with the man she met earlier that day. That man was Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. Later that evening, a friend of Donworth's, Constant Linfield, witnessed Donworth with a gentleman who appeared very well dressed and a topper in the period vernacular. The two seemed to have a good time walking arm in arm down the streets of Lambeth. A few hours later, another friend of Donworth's, James Stiles, spotted Donworth, supposedly drunk, standing near a gate where she could barely keep herself erect. Stiles went up to Donworth and noticed she needed help. He had her place her arm around his neck, and the two made their way toward her lodging house. By the time the two made it to her flat, Donworth was convulsing and grabbing her chest and stomach, claiming she had excruciating pain. Donworth was said to have stated at one point, "That gentleman with whiskers and a top hat gave me a drink twice of a bottle with white stuff in it." Because of the severe pain, Donworth cried uncontrollably. While others stayed with the young girl, Stiles went to the local medical institute and fetched an intern named Johnson to rush to the lodging house to attend to Donworth. But by the time that Johnson arrived, Donworth's spasms became so unpredictable that all the people witnessing the fits could do was watch helplessly. Donworth continued to gasp for every breath, and the intern recognized that she had been poisoned and summoned the police. When they arrived, Donworth was taken to the local St. Thomas Hospital. The young, impressionable prostitute succumbed to her malady and died in the carriage on the way to the hospital. A post-mortem 2 days later revealed that Ellen Donworth had lethal doses of strychnine in her stomach. The coroner at the time, Dr. Thomas Herbert, confirmed that her last hours must have been spent in agonizing pain. The effects of the strychnine have been described as thus:
although the convulsions are terrible, you do not lose consciousness. In fact, the mental faculties are largely unimpaired until death ensues. You know you are dying. The first symptoms are those of apprehension and terror, followed by muscle stiffness, twitching of the face, and finally, tetanic convulsions of the entire body. The body relaxes, and then the spasms strike again. You have a sense of being suffocated. Indeed, death is actually by anoxia, lack of oxygen due to contraction of the lungs. All the muscles go rigid and the face and lips turn blue. Death occurs in 1 to 3 hours, the face fixed in a macabre grin.
Dr. Cream, as it turned out, prepared for each murder he conducted. He purchased his strychnine from Priest's Chemists located on Parliament Street. Because he was a registered doctor, he claimed to have attended a great deal of conferences at St. Thomas Hospital, a fabrication he related to many clerks at the chemists. He was able to procure the poisons he wanted as well as their quantities. By law, Dr. Cream had to register his purchases along with the quantities and then sign the register. He purchased in the first week of October Nux vomica in liquid form, containing 2 alkaloids, bromine, and strychnine. On October 10th, he ordered gelatin capsules which he determined to be too large. Donworth seemed to have succumbed to the fluid within those very gelatin capsules. Matilda Clover, 27 years old, brown-eyed and slightly buck-toothed, lived at 27 Lambeth Road with her 2-year-old son, landlords Mr. and Mrs. Voles, and a servant girl named Lucy Rose. Matilda found life especially trying since her husband and the boy's father left, forcing her to resort to prostitution to support her and her young son. In addition to paying her rent, the income earned from the streets allowed Matilda to maintain an alcohol addiction. Understanding that her life needed adjustments in order to take care of her son, she started down a path to recovery. Matilda had been seeing a Dr. Graham for her alcoholism, and he prescribed for her a sedative named bromide of potassium. During the day and night of October 20th, 1891, Lucy Rose, the servant girl from the lodging house who stated that on that day, Clover left her room shortly after dark to meet a man named Fred. Rose learned this information after snooping around Clover's apartment while dusting, reading a note Clover left on a table. The note read, "Meet me outside the Canterbury at 7:30 if you can come clean and sober. Do you remember the night I brought you your boots? You were so drunk that you could not speak to me. Please bring this paper and envelope with you. Yours, Fred." Clover returned home at approximately 9 p.m. with a man. Because of the lack of light in the hallway leading to the residence, Rose failed to see the man's face clearly. Later, Clover left the residence to retrieve some ale. While she was gone, the man left. At approximately 3 a.m., the entire lodging house became alarmed when they heard Clover's screams. Rose and the Voles rushed to Clover's residence, and when they opened the door, they found her on the bed, naked and writhing in convulsions. Clover began to choke and vomited. When she was able to speak through the contortions in agony, Clover related to Rose and the Voles that Fred had given her some pills that she now knew were poison. The Voles summoned a doctor, but there was nothing he could do. Clover died at approximately 7 a.m. that morning. At first, Clover's death had not been classified as a murder. Her doctor, Dr. Graham, stated that she had succumbed by mixing an excessive amount of liquor, most likely brandy, with the sedative he prescribed, a response that would have, he claimed, produced the same bodily fits she suffered. If the doctor had been reading the local media, he would have realized the existence of the Lambeth mystery, mysterious poisonings that had occurred in the area within the last few months. Ironically, the authorities labeled Donworth's death as cold-blooded murder even when she and Clover suffered from the same symptoms. Why the authorities did not follow up on the mysterious and elusive Fred puzzled those close to the events. Lucy Rose remembered that Clover informed her that Fred was going to give her some pills that would prevent venereal disease. Authorities took an additional 6 months before they even considered Clover to be a murder victim. As Clover's body was lowered into her grave at the Tooting Cemetery on October 22, 1891, neither Scotland Yard or the local constabularies believed they were dealing with an early serial killer. Letters sent by an M. Malone to 2 prominent members of society, a Dr. William Broadbent and a high-focus aristocrat, Lord Russell, demanded £2,500 for both in order to keep the information secret that they were responsible for Clover's death. This seemed strange since authorities did not consider Clover a murder victim at the time. In considering that Clover and Donworth were prostitutes, it was not uncommon for women to reduce themselves to that when times appeared really tough. Also consider that these murders took place not too long after the Jack the Ripper case. Many in the upper crust of Victorian society looked at these types of murders to be unfortunate, yet considered them to have a percentage impact on society. On the other hand, the common Londoner felt the sympathy of those who had to resort to this type of vocation to keep from starving. For the authorities, they considered prostitution to be somewhat of a black mark on their beats. In November 1891, a month after the death of Matilda Clover, Dr. Cream received a telegram from his family in Canada to come home so that the final disbursement of his father's estate could be perfected. Dr. Cream made friends and then cultivated somewhat of a relationship with a woman named Laura Sabatini, a woman he met on an excursion to Hertfordshire. Realizing he was no longer a young man, Dr. Cream desired a young, pretty wife that he could show off in society. To make sure that he had her heart, before he made the journey to Canada, Cream financed Sabatini's dream of owning a dress shop in the West End of London. Prior to financing his beloved's dream, Dr. Cream showed Laura and her mother around London, often buying them expensive lunches and dinners around the city. Kissing her goodbye on the Liverpool docks, Cream boarded the SS Cernia on January 7, 1892, headed for his homeland, with a plan to return to London very soon. Cream returned to London 4 months later, and in April 1892, he re-established contact with the Sabatini family at their home at Bermstead, Hertfordshire, where he proposed to Laura Sabatini, and she accepted. They dined at a fancy restaurant, and Dr. Cream projected the image of being an upstanding citizen. However, when he traveled to London, he became a night-prowling predator. One evening away from his fiancée, Dr. Cream stalked London in search of some female company. When he made his way through Piccadilly, he spotted an especially good-looking young lady, obviously a prostitute, that he invited back to his hotel for a romantic tryst. Before negotiating, Dr. Cream and the young lady dined at the Palace Hotel on Garrick Street, eating food and drinking a bottle of Burgundy wine. Dr. Cream learned that the young lady went by the name of Lou Harvey. In actuality, her real name was Louise Harris. The couple had sex, and Louise left in the morning, promising to see him again the following evening. When Harris met with Cream again, he offered her 2 capsules because he said that her cheeks lacked color and the pills would rejuvenate her. Being suspicious at the suggestion, Harris pretended to take the pills, and when Cream looked away, she spit them over the embankment where they stood for their rendezvous. Later that evening, Dr. Cream looked at his watch and told his escort that he had to get back to St. Thomas Hospital. He gave the girl 5 shillings and left her at a local pub. Perhaps since Harris got rid of the pills, Dr. Cream realized the desired effect he had hoped for would not occur, and should make his exit quickly, never to return in Harris's presence. Just at about the time these murders began, letters started to be received from around Lambeth that appeared to blackmail the addressee. One of the intended victims, Frederick Smith, was the son of a wealthy businessman. The letter threatened Smith that if he did not pay a certain sum, the sender of the letter would expose Smith as Donworth's killer. In order to avoid this exposure, Smith was to place a sign in the window of his business stating, "Mr. Fred Smith wishes to see Mr. Bain, the barrister, at once." Another letter was also sent to a popular member of Parliament accusing him of the Donworth murder and demanding £3,000, or the information would be brought to the proper authorities. Smith brought the letter to the authorities, who placed the correspondence in a file where blackmail letters had been sent to the residents of the area. As sudden as they began, the murders ceased. The explanation for this pause was that Cream visited his brother in Canada in the following spring, Cream returned to England. On April 11, 1892, Cream followed Alice Marsh and Emma Shrivel, the two women having just met where they loitered in St. George's Circus just off Stamford Street. Cream eventually got the women to trust him, and they made their way to a rooming house located at 118 Stamford Street. Alice removed the key from her bag and opened the door to her flat. Once the trio walked in, they sat in the small living area characteristic of a small, poverty-ridden neighborhood of the time. Cream grinned at the women, and they attributed his jovial behavior to what was about to happen from a sexual standpoint. The women promised that they would drink with him and perhaps do more, but Cream made it a point for the women to consume the pills that he brought with them. This was the real reason for his gleeful look. The pills, he told them, would prevent venereal disease, the dreaded scourge of their profession. Marsh felt sorry for Cream. After all, he moved from Canada to practice medicine at St. Thomas Hospital and really didn't know anyone when he moved there. Or, that was the story that he told the two women. Alice Marsh removed her blouse, exposing an ample bosom, and silently encouraged Emma Shrivel to do the same. After the business had been concluded, Cream said he wanted to offer the girls a gift. "You will find them more precious than money," he said. Cream threw open his doctor's bag and brought out 2 little bottles. Cream took some of the pills out of the little bottles and handed them to the young women. He stated, "Take these before retiring. I will give you more next time we meet." When Alice asked if they worked, Cream responded, "Like nothing you've ever tried before." Cream left the lodging house at approximately 2 a.m., greeting a bobby on the way out of the building into the street. At approximately 2:30 a.m., the landlady for the building, Mrs. Charlotte Voigt, awakened half-conscious due to a whimpering that she heard coming from the upstairs residence of Alice Marsh. The whimpering soon turned to loud groaning, then screaming, followed by a horrendous banging noise. Mrs. Voigt then awoke her husband and dressed in a robe before investigating further. When the Voigts opened the door, they discovered Alice Marsh on the hallway carpet, writhing in convulsions and pain, with an occasional spasmodic fit. Marsh struggled to breathe, grasping her throat in between the convulsions. From inside of Marsh's residence, Emma Shrivel also suffered from whatever malady Marsh had been experiencing at the time. Marsh lived long enough to inform the authorities that she and Shrivel had drinks with a tall, cross-eyed man who gave them each 3 long pills. After the police had been summoned, an ambulance from St. Thomas Hospital arrived, but it was too late. The young women died in the ambulance on the way to the infirmary. A later autopsy revealed that both women had high levels of strychnine in their systems. With the 2 most recent deaths, Scotland Yard believed a serial poisoner at work. On May 5, 1892, the deputy coroner responsible for the Marsh-Shrivel case, George Percival, received a strange letter from a man named William H. Murray. The handwritten piece subtly pointed to a Dr. Walter Harper of St. Thomas Hospital as being the poisoner of the 2 prostitutes on Stamford Street. At the same time, Dr. Harper also received a letter that implicated his son in the murders. The author stated that if Dr. Harper paid £156, that the author of the letter would suppress any of this evidence so that authorities would not arrest his son. Once the Harpers brought the letter to the police, along with the letter received by Dr. Percival, the authorities stated they would keep a good watch to determine where the letters originated and from whom. Scotland Yard wondered if William Murray may not be the same blackmailer under another pseudonym, an A. O'Brien detective, who had written the letter to Dr. Percival, which had accused a popular member of Parliament for the poisonings. It also appeared that 2 other people received letters regarding the death of Martha Clover. Because the tone and the handwriting appeared to be similar, the authorities believed that the same person wrote those letters. With the murder of Alice Marsh and Emma Shrivel, the Metropolitan Police, with the kind assistance of Scotland Yard, re-energized their hunt for the Lambeth poisoner. The authorities inquired into the local chemists to check their records for purchases of lethal compounds. They did this with a concentration on known criminals who may have used their real names to purchase the poisons. The authorities also searched the residences of known criminals to determine whether there was any connection with the poisonings. One man, William Slater, had been arrested in a Caledonia Road apartment. Slater had a violent reputation with the local authorities, and he also had what was described as a snarled face only a mother could love. The police found nux vomica and morphine. Unfortunately, even though authorities found these substances within Slater's hovel, they could not connect him to any of the poisonings. Scotland Yard strongly believed that because a gap existed between the time periods of the murders, perhaps concentrating just in London proper limited the scope of their investigation. At first, authorities believed that the culprit could have been a sailor who traveled to other destinations in addition to England. Cream probably would not have been a suspect had it not been for his own ego. At this time, criminologists and historians have hypothesized that Cream's downfall came from his own need to make mistakes so that he would inwardly be apprehended. Ever since Cream made his way to England and kept returning, he made friends with a former American detective from New York named John Haynes, who lived near an Armstead's photographic studio located at 129 Westminster Bridge Road. The murders in Stamford Street had been the talk in certain corners because they only occurred a few days before. At that time, Cream, using the alias of Neill, sparked up a conversation with Haynes regarding the murders. Because Haynes still held the personality of a detective and because of his previous training, he took great interest with the poisonings. Haynes found his new friend's knowledge of the case to be extremely fascinating. Over dinner that evening, Neill and Haynes conversed about the murders, and Haynes expressed a great deal of surprise that Neill even remembered the names of the victims, as well as other details that were not covered within the local newspapers. After that dinner, Neill and Haynes decided to go for a walk in the Lambeth dusk. As they strolled past the rows of residences, they reached the address of 127 Lambeth. Once the two arrived at that address, Cream stopped and so did Haynes. Cream related the events of Clover's last night on Earth as if he were an eyewitness to the event. Clover, Cream claimed, was an imbecile that let a man she barely knew into her house. But then again, women of her dirt-cheap class do not live by brain power, do they? Cream continued that the killer managed to remove the foil wrapping from the gelatin pills, 3 of them, and put them in his vest pocket. When Clover returned after visiting a pub to bring back some drink, the killer presented her with the pills that he promised earlier. They should have sex, and then he will give her the pills. After their deed completed, they sat in the kitchen of the small abode to have a drink. The killer instructed her to just swallow the pills and not chew them because the taste would be bitter. He witnessed her take a large gulp of beer, followed with the pills. Placing his hat on his head, he stated he would be back later that evening to check on her. Of course, knowing full well what the pills could do, the killer left the young lady in her residence. When Haynes queried Cream regarding the knowledge he just imparted, the suspicious doctor merely stated that he surmised the events of that evening. Haynes retorted that he did not know detectives that worked that way. They resorted to facts and not assumptions. When Haynes asked Cream about Lou Harvey, Cream responded that her name must have been a shortened moniker for Louisa or Louise. Cream then led Haynes to Waterloo Bridge, just a short distance from where Harvey lived. Once the two men arrived at that location, Cream went into his recitation. Here they stood, right here, just having finished a sip of the grapes at the Northumberland. They were supposed to be on their way to the Oxford for a respite of vaudeville that began at 8:30, but he detained her here, admitting that he must leave her for a while, as rushing business called. He dropped into her small, gloved hand some money for the show, where he promised to meet her by curtain call and then with the 2 gelatins. "For your color," he told her. The stupid trollop believed him, and she swallowed them. Well, then, I imagine he scooted after that pretty scene and left her standing there at the threshold of hell." Haynes carefully watched Cream's eyes as he told the story. When Haynes asked Cream how long she could have lived after taking the pills, the doctor responded, 2 to 4 hours. Haynes told Cream that he felt a little thirsty and asked where they could get a drink. Cream related that the Northumberland pub was around the corner and he knew the way. Haynes observed Cream's actions and how he moved through the dark streets of Lambeth, maneuvering through the fog like he was a native, or a killer who rehearsed his getaways with ruthless efficiency. The two had a drink and spoke no further about the murders the rest of that evening. The following morning, Haynes went to see his best friend in London, Inspector Patrick McIntyre, who was attempting to find Haynes a job with Scotland Yard. Haynes related to McIntyre that his companion, the previous evening, the man who called himself Neill, told the places, the times, and the methods the killer used for the poisonings. Haynes stated that he was probably using conjecture, but the American detective stated that he watched his companion through his eyes and his actions and swore that his companion was there when the murders took place. Just then, McIntyre rose from his desk and seemed to be deep in thought. The names rang a bell with the inspector, but he made a note on a notepad and informed Haynes that he would look into the matter. Haynes mentioned, as a footnote, that he believed the man he walked with through nighttime Lambeth was just bragging. But then the more details that Neill revealed, the more that Haynes believed his companion to be a viable suspect. McIntyre began thinking the same thing, that this man who walked along with all confidence with his American friend could most likely be the Lambeth poisoner. When Haynes turned to leave, McIntyre asked if he knew the man's address. Haynes responded, 118 Lambeth Road. McIntyre looked gleeful with the information as he remembered the letters of the intended blackmailer, and this was one of the addresses given for Dr. Harper's son, whom the blackmailer accused of the murders. McIntyre believed the man calling himself Neill was a very interesting suspect. Unbeknownst to Dr. Cream, the net began closing in on him. He still stalked prostitutes in the Lambeth area, and authorities in the London area were investigating him as well. The director of the Central Investigation Department of Scotland Yard, Sir Robert Anderson, wanted the case to come to a conclusion as soon as possible. When Scotland Yard pursued the investigation further, they discovered through passport records that the man who identified himself to Haynes as Neill was actually Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. Authorities also surveilled Cream around the clock, as well as combing records regarding the suspected death of someone named Lou Harvey. The Home Secretary issued an exhumation order for the body of Matilda Clover, and then Scotland Yard sent one of their top investigators, Frederick Jarvis, to North America to research Cream's personal background. On the night of Marsh and Shrivell's deaths, the police officer that bid Cream goodnight as he left the residence, an Officer Comley, was reassigned as a plainclothes officer and engaged in the surveillance of Cream. He reported to his commander that just a few days after his assignment that Cream spent several evenings outside of the Canterbury Music Hall, where the officer observed Cream watching women very intently coming and going from the venue. On the evening of May 12, 1892, Comley and another officer, Sergeant Alfred Ward, observed Cream purchasing the services of a prostitute near Elephant and Castle, St. George's Road, and the two officers followed Cream and the prostitute to her home on Elliott's Row. The couple stood outside of the residence for a short time until Cream left. Sergeant Ward sought out the chambermaid, Lucy Rose, that worked in the lodging house where Clover had resided. The reason the detective sought out the former chambermaid was that she actually saw the man that Clover identified as Fred, the man that Clover met the evening of her death. Rose described Cream as the man masquerading as Fred. Two other women went to the authorities, Eliza Masters and Lizzie May, who were acquainted with Dr. Neill back in October of 1891 at Ludgate Circus, where the stranger bought them drinks at King's Lud's Castle Pub. Dr. Neill chatted with the two women, and they considered him harmless. The two women considered the good doctor to be very congenial and gentlemanly, with an open wallet. Several days later, Dr. Neill stated that he would call on the girls again, but he didn't show. However, later on the afternoon he was supposed to be with the two girls, they witnessed Dr. Neill with none other than Matilda Clover. On May 6, 1892, authorities exhumed Matilda Clover's body. There were 14 coffins that had to be removed from a pauper's grave before the right body had been exhumed. After a lengthy autopsy, Matilda was found to have
the residue appeared purple when color tested. A frog injected with the fluid found in the corpse's stomach, liver, brain, and chest died within a matter of minutes in the throes of the characteristic symptoms of strychnine poisoning, tetanic convulsions. The autopsy left no doubt that Clover had been poisoned.
At the same time, Inspector Jarvis sent information from Canada where Scotland Yard sent him to find some history on Dr. Cream. The information related that a man, Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, fell under suspicion when his wife died mysteriously after he sent some pills for an illness that she developed in his absence. And some American authorities believe that Cream may have been responsible for some of the deaths of prostitutes who died mysteriously in Chicago, Illinois. This preceded his release from prison through political maneuvering. The final nail in Cream's coffin was when the British authorities acquired samples of Cream's handwriting. When they received those samples, police immediately arrested Cream on June 13, 1892, for suspicion of blackmail. Police booked Cream at the Bow Street station, and he was charged with extortion before the magistrate. Cream kept his mouth shut and continued to proclaim his innocence. Superintendent Anderson wanted to keep Cream incarcerated until they could build a more favorable case. This the authorities did during the inquest into Matilda Clover's death. American Detective Haynes testified as to the details that Cream gave him on their nocturnal walk in a coroner's inquest. Haynes emphasized that Cream mentioned details from the murders that only the killer would have known. Additionally, there were witnesses that saw a man matching Cream's description with Matilda Clover the night she died. A chemist produced a bill of sale for strychnine, which Cream signed. Another witness stated that she spoke with Cream, and he related to her that he had evidence against a very popular member of Parliament who was responsible for the poisonings. Throughout the proceedings, Cream sat calm and cool. After all, he knew the law and believed the evidence presented against him so far could be explained away convincingly. But he did not count on the next witness to testify. The witness sauntered in and was very anxious to testify. That witness was Lou Harvey. She identified Cream as the man who tried to get her to take 2 pills that he suggested she ingest near the Charing Cross embankment. On July 13, 1892, the coroner's inquest found that Cream administered the poison that killed Matilda Clover. After being charged for her murder, authorities moved Cream to Newgate Prison. The trial took place from October 17th through the 21st, 1892. The prosecution produced the same material that brought the murder charge against Cream at the coroner's inquest. The defense produced no witnesses to exonerate the accused. In the eyes of the jury, Cream could not overcome the evidence against him and voted for conviction for the murder of Matilda Clover. Justice Henry Hawkins then pronounced the sentence of death. He told the witness in front of the court,
"Your willingness to murder was so diabolical in its character, fraught with so much cold-blooded cruelty, that it could only be expiated by your own death."
On November 16, 1892, since public hangings had been outlawed in Great Britain since 1868, Cream's execution took place within the walls of Newgate Prison. Present were the sheriff, a surgeon, and a justice of the peace. A Canadian newspaper resounded, "Probably no criminal was ever executed in London who had a less pitying mob awaiting his execution." After Cream reached the end of the rope, the mob outside acknowledged the black flag raised to signify to those waiting that the sentence of the court had been carried out.
After Cream's execution, rumors spread that his last words were, "I am Jack thee." Since at the time the Jack the Ripper murders were still fresh in the minds of those within the British Empire, serious investigation by ripperologists, historians, and criminologists deduced that Cream could be considered a serious suspect for the first real sexual serial killer in history. The truth is that Cream had been serving a prison sentence in America from 1881 to 1891 in Joliet Prison. However, in order to make sure that Cream never left the never-ending list of suspects in the Jack the Ripper murders, historical rumors began to spread that Cream, wait for it, had a double. Yes, some believe that Cream appeared at different locations all over the planet at the same time. Therefore, according to this tinfoil logic, while Cream 1 was in Joliet Prison, Cream 2 committed the Whitechapel murders. Historians and theorists also maintain that Cream's handwriting matches the handwriting on the two Ripper letters. If you would like to see the evidence regarding the handwriting, please look for our earlier episode, Jack the Ripper, Closer to the Truth. Cream was methodical and sadistic, unalarming and charming. Granted, he's still a murderer, but in only extreme cases has the serial killer changed their signatures. We hope you enjoyed this episode on True Crime Man's Dark Imagination on Thomas Neill Cream. If you would like to support us, we are on Subscribestar, Rumble.com, and we also have a PayPal account. We're on Twitter and Facebook. For True Crime Man's Dark Imagination, I'm Alan Gautreaux. Until next time.